Hospital Porter's Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to her Panmo TV and welcome to this. It is another video in which I reply to Mr. Molyneux. That's right, Stefan Molyneux. Oh, I've done so many of those before. I'll put links in the description box anyway, so you can watch the previous ones. I'll put a couple of other extra links as well because this is a very, very interesting discussion, what we're going to do today, because it ties in with so many other things that I've talked about, including subjects I've discussed very recently, which is why I mean, I've been sitting on this for a couple of months, but I thought it would be a good idea to get this done now, I think. Stefan Molyneux. I mean, Stefan Molyneux is somebody I watch regularly. He's, I think I find him very often very inspiring. I've even donated money to him, you know, as he asks people to do. Every now and again, though, he talks complete crap. And those are the occasions when I kind of like take him to task for that, I think. Yeah, I'll take my glasses off, actually, because I don't really need them for this particular program. And so that makes it a lot easier, doesn't it? Yeah, and because you don't get the reflection on the lens, and I can sort of look at the camera like that. Now, this is basically a review of two. These are two programs that he did. He did them quite a long time apart. So this is kind of like one I don't know when, I think it was back in 2013 or something. It was program 2283. So I think it's like early 2013. He was back in those days. And the other one is more recent, though. It's program 5502. So that's kind of a recent one. But he discusses the concept of the soul and mysticism. And I mean, I've done mysticism replies to him before, and I was thinking about calling it like a third reply to, you know, mysticism, a third reply to Stefan Molyneux, but in the end I decided to just a sec, well, I'm just updating my notes, that's it. In the end I decided to call it a soul, the soul, a reply to Stefan Molyneux, because I don't think I've done the soul before, but I will check, because yeah, I've done so many of these that you guys, I think, have a better memory of the videos I've done than I have, you guys who watch. So I'm sharing audio. That's great. So what we're going to do is, as always, I'm claiming fair use on this. I think this is a transformative work, etc., etc. I need to get one of those banners at the bottom that goes, sort of rolls across the bottom of the screen like Terry Joyce uses. I mean, those would be perfect, I think. Now, for those of you who are familiar with my replies to Stefan Molyneux, you'll know that I have like a kind of an audio bumper marker. So what I've done is I insert a particular audio noise to basically alert me that I need to refer to my notes, because I've actually listened to all this before. So I've listened through it. I've made some notes. Oh, pardon me. And when I hear a particular noise, that means it's a point where I need to reply to him, and I choose a different noise for each one. I try to make it relevant to the particular subject. Now, what I've done is this time the noise I've chosen is quite unusual. It's not really relevant, but it's one I really, really like, and it's actually, you'll recognize it when you hear it. You'll recognize it when you hear it, and you'll hear it every so often throughout this audio. And I must say, you know, I have edited this slightly. I have edited Stefan's audio slightly, which I know is a little bit controversial. You know, with Skeptic at the North, I didn't even try it because I knew the response I'd get. But with Molly, I think I could do this. I've edited it slightly for brevity and for when there are occasions when Stefan goes off topic. But I swear I have not edited it in any way to misrepresent him or to strawman him and to make it easier for me to debunk what he says. I really promise you I've not done that. Some of you, I know there's always going to be people who don't believe me, but there you go. So I'm going to start off by playing the bumper noise just so you know what it is, and then we'll begin. So regular viewers will recognize this. Okay, here we go. Where is it?
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Right, that is David Icke on the Week in Politics with Andrew Neil. If you remember, he did like a 20-minute interview with him, and there's Michael Botello and the other host, and you know, Andrew Neil, he a Big King Jock, as I call him, he asked David straight out. He said, "Do you think the royal family are shape-shifting lizards?" Now, there's so many ways David could have answered. He could have said, he could have prevaricated and diverted and said, "Well, it depends what you mean by lizards and reptiles." Or he could have said, "Well, it's some of these things are issues that I came up with and research that I led to." He could have given a long, drawn-out, very obfuscatory answer. He said, "No, yes, I do." That was the best answer he could have given, and I really respect him for that. I really, really do. So that's, even though it's off topic, it's not related to this particular subject. That is the bumper noise I've chosen for this particular topic. So with no further ado, let's start. I'm going to get my notes up and we will begin. Here we go. Right.
Okay, I just wanted to quick ask a question.
This is a chap called Steve who's phoned in to ask Stefan about the soul and about what the nature is of the soul. You can hear a phone ringing in the background. Ignore that. That's just I don't know why that's happening. It's just, I think it's that maybe Stefan's ringmaster. He used to have like these MCs in those days. Just trying to call someone else.
Regarding the concept of the soul, I've been trying to figure that out.
Yellow.
I know you write about it a few times in some of your books and stuff, but I'm not quite sure what you feel about it.
All right.
Sure, yeah. You just kind of go and explain to me right quick.
Sorry, what I mean about with the word soul?
Yeah, I must point out that even you'll find out later, even though Stefan has changed his views on Christianity and he's even become something of a cultural Christian. I mean, I did wonder for a while whether this was going to lead to some genuine conversion, as is the case with Dave Cullen, because Dave Cullen has been a cultural Christian for a long time. However, he has recently, as you know, from a very, very good video I did, which I'm very proud of, he has in the last couple of years really discovered a genuine spirituality, a genuine faith. Molly hasn't gone there, and I mean, I did wonder for a while, but it looks like he's not going to go there. But I'll maybe we'll talk about that later when we come to program 5502.
Yeah, what is your what is your belief or what do you think about the concept?
And this is back in 2013. All right, so he's he's still very Dawkinsian and kind of like new Four Horsemen attitude at the moment, new atheism.
Of the soul itself. Because I know I have friends that believe that it's real. I have friends that they tell me this stuff about like ESP and things like that. I'm not sure. After reading some of your stuff, I'm kind of beginning to have some conflicts regarding what they believe. So I'm gonna try to see what your side on it is.
Well, I haven't sort of made up my own word with regards to this. I think I have a pretty typical or average conception of the idea of the soul, which is that it is an immaterial essence of the personality that survives past death, and can't be killed, and in many ways, in fact, can't be corrupted or is always savable. The deathbed confession and getting absolution from the priest for things you did.
Right.
That were bad.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
So we have here, Stefan says he has an average concept of what the soul is. As it turns out, he has a slightly dated and rather simplistic concept, which is probably about 50 years behind what the most recent research into this issue addresses. So the first part he says is spiritual. He says it's a non-corporeal, what the exact word he used, a non-physical element of ourselves, and so it's spiritual, it's psychical, etc., etc. And then the second part he says it's very much in line with organized religion, especially Christianity. It's something that is indestructible, can't be killed, can't be destroyed, is pure and can be saved. So he mentions the deathbed confession and absolution, which this is a particular element of Christianity. This is an element of Christianity which I myself share his sort of aversion or misgivings about, and this is especially prevalent in Roman Catholicism. The idea that you can have the sacrament of confession at any point, and whatever you did in the past is just sort of like deleted as if it never happened, which kind of precludes it eliminates the responsibility for you to deliver a firstly, a secular real-world apology, a methodology to prevent whatever you did wrong happening again, and the attempts to make restitution for what you did wrong, because those three things are necessary. This is something I agree totally with Stefan on. These things are necessary when it comes to these three things are very necessary when it comes when you do something wrong. That's the point. So let's let the big chatty speckly forehead continue.
So, and generally, it is considered to be a virtuous part of you.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
A virtuous? I don't know what he means. The soul is considered to be a virtuous part of you. That really doesn't make much sense, even from a conventional religious point of view. Your soul is the element of you created by God, which is the spiritual part of you created by God in most religions, in Abrahamic faiths, for example. Now, other religions have more complex visions of it. For example, the ancient Egyptians have different levels of the soul. I think in Hinduism it's something quite similar. But virtuous, you see, virtuous is a word that he uses a lot. Molly is always saying the word virtue and virtuous, but it applies to conscious actions only. So I don't know where he gets this idea that a soul is virtuous or indeed not virtuous. That really doesn't make much sense to me.
And so it is the essence of who you are that is independent of your material form. And
that's true. That's true. Again, that's what he says at the beginning. Molly tends to repeat himself a bit. You may have noticed. This is one of the reasons I edit these audios slightly. Was one of the reasons is because what Molyneux will tend to do is he will, when he wants to address a subject, like this particularly came up with the nice guys. If you remember the nice guys video I made about him, he will make a point by using a metaphor, and then he will repeat the point using a different metaphor, and then a third metaphor and a fourth metaphor, and he'll go over and over again. And it can take him like 40 minutes or more to move on to the next point. I mean, it's not a criticism really. I mean, I find his metaphors quite amusing, but it's still, and of course he is an entertainer at the end of the day. His job is to say things on video or say things on audio that make people want to listen to him and therefore send him donations.
I mean, I think it makes about as much sense as ghosts. In fact, it makes less sense than ghosts, because at least ghosts can go everywhere because they're immaterial, but somehow your soul is bound to your flesh.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Right. Well, where did he get that from? Ghosts and souls are different. Now, that could be true. It could be they are different, but ghosts can go everywhere where your soul is bound to your form. So it makes less sense. I think he lacks a bit of an understanding of this concept, actually. Again, this is probably quite an old idea. This is quite a sort of old-fashioned idea about probably dates back to early theology. So I'm a bit that to me is just, it sounds a little bit weird what he just said. To be honest, it sounds a little bit weird, and I don't get that at all. Anyway, let him carry on.
The concept of the soul, like many things that came out of religion, the concept of the soul makes a kind of sense.
Did it come out of religion? I don't know about that. 'Cause depends how you define religion. I mean, there's evidence that some Neanderthal men, Neanderthal humans, buried their dead, which indicates possibly in the beginning of an awareness of soul within human cognition, without necessarily being attached to any religion. I mean, no one's ever discovered a Neanderthal church, for example.
In that we clearly can do some absolutely astounding things as bipedal mammals. We can just do unbelievably amazing things. The idea that the few pounds of meat sitting on top of our brain stems can write plays and compose music and design massive engineering structures and overcome history and heal itself, and I mean, the things that the brain can do are literally beyond comprehension, because I think we're only scratching the surface of what the brains can do over time.
Yeah, but and he actually, I've actually edited this out, but he does a big long speech about how we have yet to understand the brain because of children having bad upbringings and things like this. And indeed, there's even leaving that aside. I mean, science itself says there's so much we need to learn about the human brain. So I think it's strange that materialists and monists like him are so certain about these things. They're far more certain than any sort of like spiritual person or like spiritual dualist or consciousness dualist. So I mean, they are. I mean, they really, really are. So, so he says we don't know how the brain works, but we know how. But your consciousness works this way.
So, given that we have such unbelievable, literally universe-spanning potential locked inside a little cave called the skull, is something that's so hard to comprehend that I think people needed a metaphor or an analogy which made sense to them.
That's not what the soul is in traditional terms. No, as I said. By the way, I will sometimes pause it between the bumper noises because this is the second time, or actually the third time I've listened to it, and I sometimes pick up new points. Now, the traditional view of the soul is this is an immaterial spiritual form created by God, which then returns to God at the point of your death. It was never originally meant to be a metaphor. It's used as a metaphor by some materialists, including Stefan himself, but its original definition was not as a metaphor for the abilities of the human brain.
So I think that people needed to have a metaphor to encapsulate within their mind how much the mind was capable of. No. And so the idea that we have some essence to us that is beyond the material kind of makes sense. Also, of course, we can create works of art that transcend our own physical lives. And by works of art, I don't just mean paintings or whatever. It can also be the personalities of your children. But most importantly, we can create things that outlast us.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
There was actually a scientist, a cosmologist, I can't remember who it was, but he was on TV once. And he's a complete materialist, but he did say, it's as if he talked about human consciousness and cognition. And he said, it is as if the universe has created the means by which it might know itself. And I thought that's a very, very good way of putting it. I mean, obviously, I don't agree with his model of consciousness, but still, and indeed the universe itself. But it's a good poetic and illustrative way for a materialist to understand this sort of thing. But I mean, what he's described, engineering, art, science, etc., these are acts of cognition. They're not the product of the soul. Now, it could be that the soul or spiritual elements of ourselves inspire us. I mean, many people have described almost transcendental experiences when they come up with scientific ideas. Even mathematicians who are like the most they're the most highbrow and sort of nebulous and impenetrable of all scientists, really. Even they speak in almost like rhapsodic terms when they come up with ideas of new mathematical concepts. I mean, you may have I've talked before about David Malone's series of documentaries on Search for the Soul. Greg Chaikin, this mathematician talks about. It's like being up on a mountain looking down and things like this. It's so, yeah. So indeed, our cognition, sometimes you could say our cognition needs some kind of spiritual input, or at least it helps. And indeed, writers and artists always say this. I myself have experienced this. I've experienced this rush of creativity. And there's a section, there's like a 2,000 or 3,000 word passage in Evan's Land, which I wrote within the space of a couple of hours, and it's letter perfect. If you want to listen to the audiobook, it's a scene where Evan is with Warren on a hilltop. It's really, really a great. And I felt I was channeling my muse. I mean, there's this idea that you have a muse, a creative spirit. So that would be independent from your cognition. But at the same time, cognition can exist without that. Not everything I do comes from my muse. It's possible that, I mean, we've seen artificial intelligence that, as I've explained in my video about AI, there's no evidence that artificial intelligence is conscious, yet it is creative. It can create. It has the ability to cogitate and therefore create. But its creation is a copy of what it knows about creativity, what its essentially programmed with. So again, consciousness is something independent of that.
We can write a journal of our own lives, which last forever, and we can tell stories which last forever. This is the unique.
If someone's watching this millions of years in the future, thanks for tuning in.
In the animal kingdom, as far as I know. I mean, certainly no other animals can write, and they don't have an oral tradition of storytelling and so on.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
No, there are some exceptions there. Now, as far as non-human animals and their ability to create works of art and things like that. Now, we know that non-human animals can create. They have the ability, for example, to do simple mathematics. They have simple political systems. They're social creatures, and some of them do. For example, appear to enjoy listening to music. Some of the more intelligent ones, you can play music to dolphins, and they seem to enjoy it. And as elephants paint pictures as well. Let me just see if I can find them of the elephants painting pictures. Let's have a look. I might actually be able to find you an example, because I'm actually using StreamYard at the moment. Elephants painting. Here we are. Let's see if I can find it. Right, here we go. Yes, indeed, there does seem to be. I mean, there's some of these that are fake, obviously. Let's share screen, because I have the share screen function on. Obviously, some of these. Obviously, look, that one's a fake, obviously. But there are others like that are like a little bit more. You see, we see this elephant. You can't see many shapes, but they do appear to try and create some images. They're rather like children. Like my own daughter, when she first started painting, she would try to create rough shapes, and it appears that's what elephants do. They do try to do that, and they will indeed, get different colors. They'll go to they go to the paint pots and they'll get a different color and things like that. So it's slightly an aside, but obviously, elephants can actually, it appears, create basic artworks. Let's go back to this.
So we have the capacity to live on through the works that we do in a way that is unique to us as a species, and there is a kind of immortality in the works.
I should point out, actually, when it comes to immortality, elephants also seem to have a death awareness that many other species don't really show. For example, you may have heard of the elephant's graveyard, the fact that they carry the bones to a certain place and scatter them and things like that. I don't know of any other species that does that. It's really extraordinary. It's very moving, and it's very, very interesting to see them doing that. But when an elephant dies, they'll stay near the body until it's completely skeletonized, and then they'll carry the bones to a certain place, and they'll just scatter them. It shows that they seem to they think a lot about death in a way that other species don't.
You create, particularly now, of course, when everything lasts forever. I was just reading about Churchill and how Churchill always felt that he was destined for greatness, and therefore he kept everything that he ever wrote or received and so on. And this, of course, has created an immense treasure trove of arcana, so to speak, that people can claw their way through and attempt to shape. And
do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Right. That's just slightly an aside, but Winston Churchill, he's true. Winston Churchill was a great essayist, and he also kept a very dedicated diarist. And you learn a lot about the man. You learned that he suffered from manic depression. You learned that he had to resist the urge to throw himself off a ship when he was at the edge of he was standing on a ship looking at the sea, and he had to fight the urge to climb over the rail and jump into the sea. We also know that he was very into UFOs. So that's true. That's true. You could say that Winston Churchill's thoughts have outlived him in the real world. And that's true. And I mean, every person who does this sort of thing, including myself, is essentially that I think we are trying to create some kind of intellectual immortality for ourselves. It may work, I don't know. It depends how many people buy my books and how long the copies last. And indeed, the same goes for my blog and things like that. But I have left instructions, by the way, with social media, that when I pass away, just leave my contribution where it is. I don't want anything deleted. I've said that.
And So I think that it sort of makes sense back in the day to have a sort of anthropomorphic explanation for the wonder of the brain that seems so much larger than what's going on inside our skull. And in the same way that we need anthropomorphic explanations for other things, like lightning is the anger of the gods, or a tsunami is the anger of the sea gods, or whatever it is that's going on, or disease is punishment for wickedness, and so on. We couldn't find a real answer, and the prejudices of the time did not allow for a real answer to be pursued, because we came birthed out of superstition.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Right, and he's explaining himself slightly better now. I mean, he's delving into the area of the religious model again, which rather than the newer secular psychical and consciousness research model of the soul, or the theory of the soul, he is reiterating the religious model. However, it's possible he's thinking about a deeper and more earlier version of the soul, soul theory, which possibly could be in a time whenever we became self-aware. I mean, it could be that the idea, what he is saying is exactly what went through the heads of the Neanderthal humans when they started burying their dead. It's interesting, the Neanderthal graves they found, because they found flowers in the grave. Now, that's something we still do today. We associate flowers with funeral rites in many cultures, which is interesting. It's possible that was what they were thinking, and this is what their concept of the soul was, from a materialistic point of view. However, that's an assumption on his part. We don't know. We can't talk to the Neanderthals. They're gone. Well, they became extinct sometime in the early Neolithic, and we don't know where they are. We don't know how we could channel them or whatever, you know. So unless some medium gets hold of them, we won't know.
Now, so let me just sort of make one last point, and I'm stealing this directly from Sam Harris.
Oh,
thank you, Sammy.
Sam Harris.
Boy, the pipes are calling. Well, he said that the brain is who we are. Consciousness is an effect of the brain, like gravity is an effect of matter, or life is an effect of particular cellular activities.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Don't worry about stealing that from Sam Harris, Stefan, honestly, because Sam stole it from someone else. In fact, whoever he stole it from probably stole it from someone else as well. Because, I mean, maybe Sam Harris lacks originality. I know that when Alistair McGrath did his analysis of the new atheists, he omitted Sam Harris from his list. He just did Hitchens, Dennett, and Dawkins. He said, "I'm not going to bother with Sam Harris because he's not very interesting." Well, what Stefan has just said, and indeed what Sam Harris has just said, is simply the classic materialistic explanation of consciousness. There's nothing original there. In fact, it's a very old idea. It probably dates back to prehistoric times. It certainly can be found in ancient philosophy. Basically, that consciousness is a product of the workings of our brain. And in my Dorset talk, as I explained, I think the Charvakas of India believed it was the liver. But either way, it's the workings of some part of our body. It simply generates this feeling that we exist, and all these thoughts and ideas that go through our heads, our dreams when we're asleep, are simply a product of that. And they're dependent on the work, because they're a product of the workings of the body. we believe the brain nowadays. At some point, when we die, that will die with us, and it'll be gone forever. That's really not a very, very unoriginal, and just a simple, basic, materialistic, monist explanation for consciousness. So that's what Stefan is basically repeating that, and nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's millions of people around the world who still believe that. Probably a large proportion of the population believe that, but it's not kind of original.
And he said, well, we can see this very clearly, right? So if people have brain damage to particular areas of the brain, with quite clear predictability, we know what deficiencies they're going to experience. Right? So there are people who have damaged a particular part of the brain, and they can't recognize faces. They can recognize everything else, they just can't recognize faces. So they have to keep being reintroduced to people that they know. They might be able to recognize the liver spot pattern on the back of the hand. They can't recognize the faces. Oliver Sacks has done some great writing in this area, which I actually I did I adapted to plays many years ago as an exercise in theater school. So we can see with great regularity that when parts of the brain get damaged, memory or particular functions of the brain go dark as well. And so the idea that if the entire brain goes dark, suddenly, I think as Sam says, suddenly we float up into the heavens and can have conversations with our grandmother is ludicrous.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Right. Now, this is what Stefan says about the workings of the brain is true. This is what's known as the easy problem of consciousness, okay, as opposed to the hard one. And indeed, I had to research this myself, because readers of my book Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure, available at all good bookshops now, or more specifically the sequel Roswell Revealed, will know that one of the characters suffers from a stroke, and we know from lots and lots of medical research and observation that different parts of the brain will be affected when the stroke, depending on where the stroke happens and how bad it is. And now I do recommend also the lecture by Jill Bolte Taylor, A Stroke of Insight, where she describes her own stroke and how it affects her. The problem there is that they say this is the easy problem of consciousness. Indeed, your cognition is impaired, and in certain specific ways, depending on what part of the brain is damaged. However, there doesn't seem to be no one's ever suffered a stroke or any other form of traumatic brain injury or anything like that. There's no one has ever come into my hospital when I was a hospital porter who'd taken a blow to the head or from a motorcycle accident, or they'd lost a part of their brain from a gunshot, or they'd had a hemorrhagic stroke or an ischemic stroke or anything like that, which caused them to cease to be conscious. There is no part of the brain where you can say, okay, when you damage that, this person ceases to be conscious. And indeed, if you look in the description box, if I remember to put it there, and I have made a note, my book on free will, where I discuss Terrell Midana's book, The Soul of Anna Klein, which is an amazing book if you've not read it, which is about that. It's a novel, but it's a philosophical novel, a courtroom drama about this whole thing. So you can't have a stroke. This person had a stroke right here, near their pineal gland, which is where Descartes believed was where the seat of consciousness was. And then they turn into a zombie, and then they're no longer conscious. See, and now, so I think what we're dealing with here, we're talking a little bit at cross purposes, because I don't think Molly understands, or he's what we're talking about here when we talk about the soul and consciousness, or he's working to different definitions. It could be that what Molyneux is talking about here, he's talking about what I think maybe a mixture of cognition and the religious model, the classic religious model. That's what I think is happening here.
It's like saying, well, if I have 100 lights in a row and I turn each light off and each light goes on.
So I mean, different. He's switched to another metaphor to make the same point. Stefan does this an awful lot. I'll indulge him this time.
I turn the last light off. All the lights suddenly come on, spin around, turn into disco balls, and float up into the skies like UFOs. Well, this would not be.
What a thought! No, that's not actually. I mean, any people who research things like near-death experiences, that they realize your brain doesn't sort of like. Well, I mean, apart from, I don't know if you follow me on TikTok. I mean, it could be that the research by Jimo Borjigian may be contradicting that, but it still doesn't explain like the NDE and how it relates to brain activity after death.
Valid theory of science, and it can't be a valid theory of consciousness.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
You see, but Stefan is talking about consciousness. I don't think Stefan understands the hard problem of consciousness. I mean, maybe he hasn't looked into it in detail, which is a shame, because if he listens to Sam Harris, he should do, because Sam has actually just addressed the hard problem of consciousness in his talks. I think I don't want to be too hard on him, because I think he does have value. Sam Harris does, his input does have value, and I especially like his talks with Dr. David Deutsch about artificial intelligence, and about how everyone assumed that AI would eventually simply solve this problem by becoming conscious itself, and this doesn't seem to have happened. So the AI is very different from the AI of science fiction. It's not some super intelligent, cognitively perfect all-knowing, all-seeing, self-aware robot. No, it seems not to be self-aware. So that's the hard problem of consciousness we're doing, and I don't think maybe Stefan understands it.
That was one of the things that got me to ask this question, and I also thought that the soul did exist empirically.
I can't identify Steve's accent. It could be like there's a bit of Ebonics in it. He sounds possibly American. I don't know. But anyway, if you know where he comes from, let me know.
Because of the conservation of matter, where you can neither destroy nor create matter. I think that's how it goes. So
it's a little more specific or a little more general, I guess. Sorry, it's that matter. Matter can't be created or destroyed. It can be transferred to energy or back to matter, but it can't be created or destroyed.
Again, this discussion about matter being energy and energy being matter is kind of independent of the issue. Unless you assume, you have to assume. I think you have to actually be a materialist to actually to think that way, because you'll believe that consciousness is a product of matter, therefore it can become energy and things like that.
In that sense, so.
Right. And I think there has been some studies. I'm not sure how credible they are, where they measure someone's weight before and after death, and they notice a change in the weight, very minute, but they notice a change there, and the belief is that is the soul leaving the body. And
do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
All right. This is referring to the 21-gram experiment. Now, this is quite interesting because it was done by someone called Duncan McDougall, who's I think he must have had some Scottish blood somewhere, but he was actually American. He was a doctor, and he said that he wanted to find out what would happen if he weighed a person when they died. So he managed to get permission from relatives, and he basically invented a giant weighing scale big enough to put someone's deathbed on it. And at the moment of death, he discovered that some of his subjects actually slightly lost weight, just 3/4 of an ounce, just over 21 grams. And he then concluded that the soul weighed 3/4 of an ounce. Now, obviously, it was not a very good. It's not a very good way of dealing with this, I don't think, personally. Pardon me. My own view is probably what happened was he was probably people when people die, probably the respiratory tract loses a bit of moisture. Basically, there's some evaporation in the throat and in the what's it called, trachea in the lungs, and that's probably what caused that loss of weight. Yeah, but as for the wishful thinking element, again, this is MBA. I mean, Stefan does exhibit a bit of MBA occasionally, Materialist Bravery Award. And as I explained in my Dorset talk, I mean, I feel I'm repeating myself. I don't like to go into too much detail because I discussed this literally just 2 videos ago in my Dorset tour talk. My Dorset tour when I do the skeptics. People say that it's wishful thinking that we have an afterlife. And I argue, but it's wishful thinking that we don't. Because materialism has its own kind of bravado about it. So much so that possibly materialists who encounter evidence that contradicts their beliefs will fight back against it through bias because of their need. Because their finality has become part of their personality and part of their identity, and indeed a part of their self-esteem, and indeed the way they project themselves to others, their persona. So they will fight. Their bias will cause them to fight back against it for the same reason. I think possibly even more so than people who do believe in the afterlife. Anyway, I don't want to. I don't want to repeat myself because I've already dealt with this just very, very recently, and just the video before last.
I know it's 21 grams. I mean, I think that stuff is nonsense and wishful thinking. The fact that
he actually said that afterwards. So my notes, I'm slightly ahead of myself in the notes.
Energy leaves the body, or energy diminishes or ends within the body, doesn't mean that something has left, right? So, and I'll give you a sense of how primitive a thinking that is. And I don't mean to say that your friend's thinking or your thinking is primitive, but if I have a radio and I'm in some distant pygmy Amazon bush tribe.
Oh, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. You have an exclusive insight into Stefan's lack of understanding. Go on, Stefan.
Or something like that. They don't know anything about technology. And I have a radio, and I switch it on, and there's voice of the day tuned to a talk station, and the voices come out. People are like, oh, there's a man trapped inside the box, right? And you know, they listen in great wonderment, and then, you know, after an hour or two, the batteries die out, right? There's no more battery life, and so the voices stop. Well, most of them would say, well, the spirit of the radio has left the radio.
Yeah.
The soul of the radio has gone up to radio heaven, where it's all FDR all the time. but it would be, all that's happened is that the energy that runs the radio has run out.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
I don't believe it. Stefan Molyneux has just used the radio signal analogy, which is one of the best explanatory models to support dualism, the idea that there is like a soul. You know, David Icke uses this all the time. You just heard David Icke talking there. Maybe it's a good job I had him there. He says, it's like a TV set. You have a TV receiver, and sometimes, you know, the TV goes wrong. And there's TV channels beaming into it, and then sometimes you can't pick it up, and then the TV breaks down. When the TV breaks down, does that mean the TV station is no longer broadcasting? And this is your radio, TV, whatever you mean. At radio and TV, it's the same thing, really. It picks up radio waves, which then turns into sound and vision, in the case of a television, which you can then see. And when you can't see it anymore because the TV breaks down, which would be analogous to the death of the body, the TV signal is still broadcasting. And this seems to be one of the best metaphors for consciousness. And yet Molly has just used it to try and support materialism. He's just, you see, he said he talks about the pygmies in the jungle with the radio, and they say, well, you see, but ironically, the pygmies in the jungle would, you know, in that metaphorical state, are interpreting the malfunction of the radio in a better way than the scientists who say, oh, the battery's just gone flat, or it's broken down, or the little man inside the little man talking in the radio has just vanished. You see, because in the materialistic sense, they do believe there's a little man inside the radio, and it's caused, the little man in the radio who's speaking is caused by the workings of the radio, and it doesn't exist outside the radio. And when the radio breaks down, that little man just vanishes. It's I can't believe he's done this. I can't believe he's actually used that very analogy, probably one that he came up with himself. And perhaps he doesn't realize that, you know, dualists have been using this analogy for ages. People like David Icke has been using it for ages to prove their point. Oh, he's so funny sometimes. He really is. Here we go. That's it.
Yeah, but does that energy have some kind of a weight or some kind of a mass of some sort that would create a reading in a scale that measures weight?
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Right, I think here on this point, I think Steve possibly also does not understand recent consciousness research either. He's come back to the 21 gram thing. But I don't know. I mean, he's, you know, he talks a lot less than Molly, as indeed guests on Molly's show tends to.
And say, for example, like, what about things like inspiration? Like, I think you were talking about art at some point in this conversation.
That's your muse. That's a good point. I mean, I think he's written, you know, he's trying to push back against what Stefan said about the brain being able to create all these great works of art and science and things.
And where does it, you know, people gain this inspiration? Oh, I was inspired to make this painting of whatever.
Well, I think an easier question is, where do our dreams come from every night? I mean, you don't have to be an artist to tell stories that are incredibly vivid and powerful. I mean, there's no entertainment system that can compete with the mere nightly dreams. I had a dream last night that I was trying to get medicine from a doctor, and the security guards were trying to catch me in the hospital because it was closed, although I knew the doctor had the medicine, and I was hiding in a closet, and we were sort of playing chase and all that. It was actually kind of a fun dream. But where does that come from? And the answer is, well, who knows? I mean, people...
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Right. Dreams. Now, dreams really are no different from thoughts. I mean, when it comes to this particular subject, you go switching onto dreams is like it's just switching onto another kind of thought. A dream is just a succession of images and ideas and emotions and sensations that occur involuntarily during certain stages of sleep. I mean, this is just. I mean, I'm very interested in things like precognitive dreams and inspirational dreams and things like that. I do actually take interest in this. Even materialists like Sigmund Freud placed enormous emphasis on dreams. In fact, Stefan does entire dream analysis shows occasionally. And there's a materialistic and indeed non-materialistic idea that dreams are an insight into your deepest thoughts and feelings, and I can accept that. But we dream all the time. I mean, we dream at least twice a night. If you don't do that, then you end up not feeling very. You end up feeling horrible the next day if you don't dream. So yeah, you need dream for sleep. But as far as the point of this particular subject goes, there is no difference. There is no difference between dream and thought in that sense. It's exactly the same. You have like a ability. You can have an ability to think voluntarily during the day, or sometimes thoughts pop into your head and things like that because your brain is working. At night time when you dream, the same thing happens. I know it is different. It's a different experience to have thoughts and feelings when you are awake, but it is very different. But when you're asleep at night and your brain is doing what it does, then exactly the same thing. In a sense, something very, very similar happens. And it's not, but I mean, the influence of the soul or something immaterial on both thoughts and dreams is pretty much the same when it comes to this point.
I've been meaning to, at some point, I will write a short book about, stuff that I wish I'd known when I was younger. My experience.
Yeah, Stefan, I think everyone would love to read that. Everyone would love to write that book. I really, really do. I think I've sort of written that one in my head myself. Most people could write that book.
It's been that people who believe in ESP are a little crazy.
I should point.
Still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, see, I think he actually. Before, I mean, I did cut a little bit out here. I cut about two or 3 minutes out because he goes on to explain that brains are rather like the body, and people's bodies in the past, in say the medieval times when we didn't have proper nutrition and we usually lived until we were 36 or something, are very different to what our bodies are now, where we have better nutrition, better medicine, and we live till we're in our 70s or 80s. And he says brains are the same. There could be a time in the future when we won't know what our brain is capable of now, because we'll know in the future, because we'll experience a natural brain for the first time ever. That kind of deepens the fallacy he used earlier, or the falsehood he used earlier when he said, well, I know what we all know, that brain, it all comes out of the workings of this bit of meat in our head. So we all know that. And essentially now he's saying, well, yeah, in the future we'll know even more. So I can predict in advance that we're going to know it all comes from the meat in our head. I mean, in my view, this prediction was made long ago, before a lot of the 20th century neurology was done. And now, of course, we've reached a point where the prediction made back before that neurology was done in the early 20th century has not come true. As I said, there's no part of your brain you can stick an electrode into or damage, and that person ceases to be conscious. Or thoughts and feelings can be created by sort of influence of electric fields on the brain, but there doesn't seem to be any way to make a person's brain believe that the thought and feeling came from them. So, for example, if you do a PET scan on a brain, you can actually work out what some of the things you're thinking roughly, just simply by looking at certain patterns of electrical activity in the brain. You can actually work out, like, if this bit here lights up if you're thinking of an apple, and this bit lights up if you're thinking of a cat, and things like this. But there's no part of the brain that lights up as if to say, well, this is where that thought form came from. That's never been found. So where is it? I know, I mean, of course, Dennett would say it's nowhere. But I mean, I covered that at the Dorset talk. He says, well, there is no consciousness. Again, as Anthony P. quips, who writes your books then, Dan?
No, I mean, this has been my experience. Like, when I was younger, I dated a lot, and I always come across these women who, believed in ESP, and a few who believed in reincarnation, and I just kind of viewed it as a little quirk. But
I think you had
it's
one in the story. You were 17 years old and you had a woman who dated ESP. It might have been in or I believe she had ESP. It might have been in real-time relationships or something, I think, right?
let's say I was 17. That makes me sound a lot better. Okay, fair enough.
Right.
But it's
I don't know.
deeply nutty.
Kind of
Like it's deeply nutty, and it's such wish fulfillment.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards? Yes, I do.
Blimey. So, I'm in the room, Steph. Do you mind? And of course, wish fulfillment, MBA again. It's MBA. But yeah, I mean, it's a bit nutty. I mean, these are subjective sort of insults, really. They don't mean anything.
And such anti-empiricism and confirmation bias, you have to shield yourself from a huge amount of rational thinking and scientific reality in order to continue to believe in this sort of phenomenon.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards? Yes, I do.
No, you don't. You don't have to shield yourself. Look, he says he always says this is a typical skeptic line. People who believe in these things have to close their minds off to rational explanations. You don't have to. You just have to look at these explanations closely and disagree with them. How much shielding have I done, guys? How was it when I went to skeptics in a pub? When I go to those, was it when I read Paranormality by Richard Wiseman? Was I shielding myself then? Was I shielding myself when I attended TAM London? At what point have I shielded myself from skeptic explanations?
It's kind of narcissistic in a way. I mean, I don't use that
narcissistic now
in any technical sense, but it's kind of like
what sense do you use it then?
You then become sort of, did I predict this? Did someone else predict that? And you get this rush of this thrill if you find out something that may have been predicted. And I mean, you end up kind of navel gazing a lot.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards? Yes, I do.
I'll just gaze at my navel. Again, this is totally unfair. This is nonsense. Yeah, it is interesting. You see, it is interesting when something happens like a piece of synchronicity. But, if you know me well, you'll know that I don't jump to conclusions like that. I don't just, I know people who do. I know somebody who saw a car follow, was on the roundabout at the same time as their bus, and this car was on the roundabout behind them, and they concluded that car was following them. I don't jump to conclusions like that. But of course, skeptics tend to polarize people, and Stefan is no exception when it comes to this this kind of like straw man fallacy. Definitely.
Looking at the mechanics of your own brain and reinterpreting coincidences as basic confirmations of your unreality and so on. So,
do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards? Yes, I do.
A coincidence? Oh, right. It's well. Do you remember? Again, I don't want to repeat myself. Look at my Dorset tour video that I've just uploaded a few days ago. What about the 5-week lottery winner? The person who won it 5 weeks in a row. Is that a coincidence? Where's the cutoff point? I said, if you're going to start saying, well, this is a coincidence and that is a coincidence, is there any statistical ceiling above which you will stop using that explanation? And if it is, where is it? Because if it's the Roman, from what I can see, saying things are coincidence is just a get out of free jail card for skeptics. That's all it is. It's just something you can throw at anything to make it go away. If someone wins the lottery 5 weeks in a row, is that a coincidence? I bet you'll say no. Okay, well, what is then? 2 weeks in a row, 3 weeks in a row? Where's the cutoff point? Where's the statistical ceiling? You need to declare that.
I'm just telling you that this is my opinion. I don't prove this or anything, but I remember.
No, but fair enough, Stefan. Express your opinion, but I think you need to learn a little bit more about this. You really do, and sometimes people talk about things they don't know anything about. I do as well. I'll sometimes speculate on things I don't know anything about, but you have to accept that someone who knows more about it may well come along and then say, well, actually, you're wrong about this, Stefan, and here's why.
I remember a woman I was dating who thought she was a psychic. I said, well, that's fantastic, because now we're going to make a fortune, because James Randi has for 30 years had $1 million prize to anyone who can prove psychic phenomenon.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards? Yes, I do.
Get me this bird's phone number, please. But look, here we go. Randy's prize. Okay. Randy's prized. Again, I'll just point you. I'll just put a link in the description box to my skeptic portal. I'll watch the Dorset tour. It's simply that. By the way, this is the book I was talking about. Just go to this. I'll go to the place there. You can see it all right. Randy's prize. Robert McLuhan. what skeptics say about the paranormal, why they are wrong, and why it matters. I sort of paraphrase the subtitle a bit for my own talk. Please feel free to pause and read the back if you want. But yes, this is a fascinating book. It really is, because it addresses the James Randi Educational Foundation's $1 Million Challenge. It really, really does. Let's carry on, Stefan.
In any kind of controlled setting, like, man, we are rich, and of course, what's the answer you get? It doesn't work that way.
To tell you the truth, I wasn't
and
sure
that's
on that one.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards? Yes, I do.
It doesn't work that way. Do you hear that? That's not what George Simpson said, did he? No, who's George Simpson, I hear you ask? Well, he's the guy who took legal action against the JREF. And indeed, it appears he won. Please do go to my Dorset talk where I talk about that in more detail. Well, please, this idea, well, the James Randi's prize of $1 Million Challenges, it's a magic wand. You can just wave at anything. And, because this prize exists, then the paranormal would obviously be real if this existed, because someone would have won the $1 Million Challenge. It's like Richard D. Hall going on about Peter Hyatt, Oh, sod all the other kinds of research. We don't need them. I'll wheel in Peter Hyatt, and then I know everything. He's my crystal ball. He's my magic wand. It's not, I think the presence of Randy's $1 Million Challenge is essentially, it's an excuse. It's used as an excuse to stop thinking or stop investigating. It really, really is. Because people who go on about it are like the people who within the conspiracy sphere who focus on statement analysis. They're people essentially who want to abandon all other forms of scholarship and replace it with something that it feels right. It feels like you're going to learn everything from it. It has this sense of being very, 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 very realistic, but it's not. I mean, honestly, I would say, it's, if there's a genuine challenge out there, go for it.
Yeah, that's really disturbed, right? Which is to say, I have this power that I know is true. Oh, well, let's verify it. No, it doesn't work that way. That's very self-deceptive. It's very manipulative. Right. It's to me, it's really quite disturbed. And I'm not saying that as a rule for everyone all the time. I'm just telling you one of the things that I wish I had figured out when I was younger.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards? Yes, I do.
Honestly, if there was a challenge which I knew to be genuine, right, and you had an ability, I would say go for it. I mean, as we've seen, as I've explained, the JREF $1 Million Challenge is not that. It has flaws. And I think there are people running it who are dishonest. And I think the reasons for their dishonesty, I think, are very deep and complex, but it's not the final word. And this book really goes into it in a lot of detail. I do recommend getting hold of a copy of this. It's very, very interesting. It's quite long, but it's well worth reading. It goes back into all the original documentation and research and things like that. Yeah, but if someone offered a challenge is genuine and appeared genuine, go for it, I would say. I wouldn't say, but it doesn't work that way. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't use that excuse. If you go for it, it doesn't work, then you can work out the reasons why. It could be that either your perception of your own ability is flawed and you're not the psychic super soldier, whatever you think you are. That's a possibility. Or it could be the test is in some way flawed. But certainly I wouldn't assume the test is always right and you're just wrong every time. Certainly not. But I'm not against the idea of testing people. I'm not. And I'm not on the idea of offering cash prizes for that either. It'd be good if I was a real clairvoyant, I'd go for it.
Was that crazy beliefs are not little quirks.
What's a lily quirk?
They are pretty deep in the personality. In fact, they really are in many ways the bedrock of the personality. And that's some pretty dangerous stuff.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards? Yes, I do.
Yeah, it's the bedrock of my personality. Yeah. I do this pretty much every free moment I have. What I'm doing right now, I'm thinking about this, doing all this. Dangerous though. In what way am I dangerous? Am I a bad person? Am I a toxic person? Am I horrible? I mean, am I ruining my own life or ruining others? I mean, please do explain, Stefan.
For your reality. So I just want to point out it's sort of an organized delusion that is actually quite dangerous to you and, of course, to themselves as well. But I just wanted to sort of mention that.
All right. I guess I have to look at my friends a little more closely then. But hey,
Well, just ask them for the evidence and point out that there's this $1 million prize. I mean, if somebody says I've got a lottery ticket, and you say, hey, I just saw that one has $1 million on it. What's the first thing they do? They run right out and cash that sucker in, right? Whereas if you say, hey, we just got to talk to the amazing Randy, you will be about the most famous human being who
I won't repeat myself.
Has ever lived to prove this.
You'll be the most famous person who ever lived? No way. You'll be in prison or you'll be dead.
And, if somebody can prove it, then someone can prove it. But you'll be rich beyond your measure, you'll be famous beyond measure, and you will do a huge amount of good to advance science and our understanding of the world. If you can prove extrasensory phenomenon, it would be an incredible boon to the world. And
do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Or a detriment, according to some people. Remember the conversation in the Discovery between Will and Harbour? Remember the Discovery? We were wrong, Dad. We were wrong. But we weren't wrong, Will. Yes, we were. We were wrong because people died. Remember that? Again, it's in my Dorset talk. If you ever passed the JREF $1 million challenge, well, you never would because they would never let you. They wouldn't let George Simpson pass it, and they won't anyone pass it. But if you, for example, when proof is published, as proof is sometimes published in some documents, I mean, it goes into in this book. It's ignored. It's frowned upon. Now, there are many reasons for this. Some are psychosocial. Some are political, though. I believe some are political. And there is actually a concerted, at a high level in academia, there is a concerted, conscious effort to suppress this information for reasons, well, for political reasons.
And people say, well, it doesn't work that way. It's like, well, if it resists proof, how could you say it's true?
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
If it really did resist proof, then yeah, but it doesn't, you see. It doesn't resist proof. I mean, again, because no one's. This is why people often say this. They say because there's I think this is enormous sort of like emotional impact with the fact there's a cash incentive at the JREF for this. I don't think they're running it anymore now. I think they've stopped it since Randy retired, and then when he died, they decided to leave it. I don't know. But there are psychosocial reasons, like I said, in many ways, why this is never addressed. Why it never comes out, because of course there are plenty of psychical research laboratories that don't offer cash prizes, and they get results which are sometimes skeptics will debunk them, usually unsuccessfully or falsely, but there's no incentive for that there. But everyone focuses on the JREF $1 million challenge because of the money. I think it's kind of I think maybe that one is one of the reasons that it's used as a distraction.
Right. I mean, the deal with ESP, when I thought about it, is because if the concept of soul exists, and there's always that argument that, all the souls are connected as one kind of entity, and we're just kind of fractal beings of that. And so they were like, because we're all connected, we can tell what each other's thinking, we can tell what each other's gonna do. I couldn't quite make sense of that. So that's why I was trying.
Another thing to be wary of is people who use scientific terms with no understanding of them. Like, I have very limited understanding of scientific terms. I'm not a scientist, but I try to keep it more or less accurate, or at least talk about my limitations. So, people who say we're all fractal shards of one consciousness, they're just using this word fractal, right? I mean, it's like saying that Seal is a mathematician because he uses the word fractal in the song Crazy. Through a fractal on a breaking wall, I see you, my friend. And anyway, but
right.
He just used the word. I mean, it's like the way people use quantum. It's like, so the
skeptics are always moaning about this.
The astrophysicist prize must go to the writers of Quantum Leap because they use that word on the TV show. I mean, people just use these words, and it's really a sinister hijacking. to use the word fractal, or to use to use scientific terms, or to think that the theory of relativity has something to do with ethics, or to think that the quantum leap somehow, or Schrodinger's cat, or the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, or Gödel, Escher, and Bach, and all this kind of stuff, to think that this has something to do with how we live our lives, and ethical or moral choices, or reality, or consciousness, or whatever it is. It is a hijacking of the virtue of science, the humility of science, in order to push a very crazy and disturbed personal agenda that's highly manipulative. Again, belief in ESP is just a virus.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
All right. Well, there's a lot to go into then. Firstly, Steve outlined quite well, I think, the concepts of the Jungian collective unconscious, which is, he describes it as, we're all connected at one level, a deep level, or something like that. You can use metaphors like that. I don't think it's unscientific to use metaphors. Some people say people are like islands in the Freudian model, completely separated, but in the Jungian model, we're connected by the seabed. But I wouldn't let bad terminology put you off the concept that's actually being discussed and the context of it. I would say, if you consider someone's terminology bad, you can always say, well, that's a bad way of putting it. Those words are wrong, the way you're putting it. But that doesn't mean that the concept itself is incorrect. I mean, I agree that some new agey types often describe things in silly ways, but that doesn't mean it's real, and it's not a virus. Now, Stefan actually goes on to talk about how awful bloody new age people are, and I have to agree with him. But yeah, I've known some pretty awful new age people, to be honest, and they say, even the nice ones say stupid things sometimes. Do you remember the bumper I used for the last Molyneux? I sense intuitively that the crop circles are some sort of communication from the earth. That might be true. It might be true, and I don't like the way they demean that young woman, actually. But she's essentially she's a bit of a straw man, and makes it she's quite easy to knock over in that sense.
And the earlier the trauma that somebody experiences, and the less they admit it.
He's talking now. I cut a little bit out here. He's talking about how childhood abuse and trauma leads to beliefs in these sorts of things.
In other words, the more it transfers into some other nonsense which shields them from their own trauma, the more dangerous it is, because the more unconscious somebody's trauma is, the more it's going to reproduce itself in you. Right? People's personalities, and in particular people's traumas, are highly contagious, and they spread themselves either by you becoming somebody who believes in the soul and reincarnation and psychic soul bubbles, or whatever it is that people talk about, or UFOs, or Bigfoot, or all this crazy stuff that goes on in the world. Either you get sucked into it, or you harden against it.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Do I misunderstand him here? But he's saying that if you believe the things that I believe, it's a project of childhood trauma and mental illness and things like that. Because I have described negative childhood experiences to you before. The abuse I received at the hands of people like Centaur and Isabel Menzies Lythe, and the way my parents responded to that, which has indeed haunted my life. But supposing I hadn't had that experience, right? Is he saying that I would become a skeptic? I wouldn't believe in all the things I believe now, and I'd essentially be a skeptic. And again, I have to ask, Stefan, is the perfect, well-adjusted, stable personality inevitably that of a skeptic? Because if so, I got to ask you, does that mean Tristan Swale? Does that mean the members of Team Droik? Does that mean the other skeptics who have provably and openly and publicly behaved like, in a monstrous way to other people, and have exhibited a huge amount of psychopathology? It's not in terms of being psychopathic, but in terms of having a psychological pathology, a psychological problem, indeed, in the way they address other people. Because I need you, maybe you should think about that. Maybe you should think about the ultra rationalists can also exhibit a huge amount of unstable, badly adjusted, and indeed destructive personalities.
And you end up in despair, cynicism, and scorn for the world that you have to live in. And so they're very dangerous things to but people's crazy beliefs are very dangerous. You should wear a hazmat suit before you go in to these kinds of things. Seriously, they're toxic. They are toxic brain patterns that reproduce through manipulation. So be very, very careful around people's crazy beliefs.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
You've been warned, ladies and gentlemen, my dear viewers. Gas, gas, gas! Now, Stefan goes on to talk a bit more about infant psychology, and he says it's all to do with the belief in oneness with your parents and your mother and things like that. And it's so infant psychology. He compares infant psychology to New Age beliefs and things like that. But then, then what happens is then the program ends. So now we're going to go over to FDR 5502. This is where he starts talking again. He's a lot more vehement this time. Now this is much more recent. This is only from about 2 months ago. So this is more recent than the previous one you've just been listening to, which was from about 11 years ago. So we'll see how much he's changed. Now, if anything, he's become a lot more angry about this.
All right. Okay. Holy shit, man. Do not fuck with mysticism. Do not fuck with mysticism. You are opening up a portal to hell.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Right, better switch off now, guys. Tap away. All right, don't watch any more of this video, or you're opening a portal to hell.
Don't fuck around with Ouija boards. Don't lay that tarot card shit down. Don't even read your fucking horoscope.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Now, Ouija boards. Okay, Ouija board. I wouldn't recommend messing around with Ouija boards. I think they can be used, but you've got to know what you're doing. You've got to be serious, and you've got to be very, very careful. Some of you might have read my short story called Ouija. I've actually written a very good short story called Ouija, which is actually an audio book. It's on one of my Halloween videos. I actually recite the entire story. So it is free on Ben's Bookcase. You can read it for nothing. It's completely free. Or you can just listen to the audio book, which is on this channel. I can't remember which year it was, but it was one of the Halloween videos. But tarot, horoscopes, I mean, again, doesn't mean if you go and just sit with someone, maybe just for fun, when you're walking along the seafront at Blackpool and you go into the gypsies stall and things like that, just for fun. I mean, is that really going to mess your mind up forever? You honestly saying just opening a newspaper and reading Russell Grant and what he says about, Libra, today you need to do A, B, and C, or this is a good opportunity to maybe apply for a new job, or write to a loved one you haven't heard of for a long time. I mean, is that really so destructive? Come off it.
Not fuck with mysticism. Don't believe in ghosts. Don't believe in any of this shit. Because
what if they're true, though? Am I supposed to believe in something that is real, not believe in something that's real, Stefan?
If she literally believes in there are ghosts and she's fucked with mysticism, then the uncle who molested her can haunt her.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Now, to give you a bit of backstory, at the beginning of this particular recording, he talks about a discussion he had with a woman, quite an elderly lady, who has trauma, who is still suffering from childhood trauma as a result of being sexually abused by her uncle. Now, that's a very tragic and horrible thing that happened. But the idea that is there's a huge causal link, there's a pipeline between that and believing the things that I do is, I think, is stretching it too far. And I think it is actually slanderous towards a lot of us and people and what we believe and things like that. Not legally slanderous, but I think defamatory, socially, if you know what I mean.
There is the biggest giant fiery bear. I'm not talking about religion. I'm just talking about straight up superstition and mysticism. There are no ghosts. There's no astrology. Our fate is not written in the stars. Astrology is bullshit. Telekinesis is bullshit. Telepathy is bullshit. Hauntings are bullshit. Ghost stories are goosebumpy fun with about as much realism as Grand Theft Auto.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Right. I think a ghost story combined with GFA would be very, very scary, and I would hope very much it wasn't real. But I mean, if you say there are no ghosts, no hauntings, I mean, tell that to Don Phillips and Steve Mara. and the very scientific study they did of the Linda residence. It's I can give you numerous other examples. It's the EVP. The time I went to that pub in Leicestershire. I mean, I did a video about it. I don't do a lot of like field research in terms of ghost hunting, to be honest, but I'm fascinated by it. And our fate is not written in the stars. No, it's this idea that astrology will predict the future 100% is not true. All right, I'm not an expert astrologer, but I keep an open mind to it. You don't like go to an astrologer and they say, it's September next year, you will bruise your toe on the toilet seat one evening when you're very tired. That doesn't happen. Astrology, it leaves behind the concept of free will and also unplanned action and chaotic action. It leaves that open. All astrology does, it measures trends and things like that and likelihoods. That's all it does. It's about energy. It's about energies acting on a particular place at a particular time, which will influence it. It's not your fate is written in the stars. As for telekinesis and telepathy, well, governments across the world have spent millions and millions of pounds investigating it. I mean, I've talked about this in Dorset. Read Ingo Swann. Read John Ronson, and then not all his stuff. Some of his stuff is crap, but I mean, The Men Who Stare at Goats. Just read that. Well, pardon me. Just read about the just watch Third Eye Spies. Definitely.
Do not fuck with mysticism. Don't go to the edge of human experience and tip over, because you will fall forever. Do not fuck with sorcery, magic, mysticism, witches, spells, ghosts, tarot, Ouija. Don't fuck with any of that stuff. Numerology, all that shit.
Oh, tell Ellis Taylor if you're watching.
Do not fuck with it, man. It will erode and destroy your brain. It is a brain virus. It is an environmental toxin, not least because of what it does to your metaphysics and your epistemology, your sense of reality and your sense of truth. But also because if you fuck with mysticism, you have to spend time with mystics, and mystics are an environmental toxin. Mystics are an environmental toxin.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
I am forced somewhat to agree with Stefan on the last part. I have been among mystical people who are particularly in the more sort of extreme elements of the New Age. And some of them are very toxic. At some point, I'll tell the full story of my trip to the Findhorn community. But I have written an article about it on Hapanmo Voice, on the main Hapanmo site. This was back in 2005. It's a long time ago. But I did spend a whole week at the Findhorn community. I remember it very well. And there's things I didn't even say in that particular article that I should maybe talk about. But there are certain people there who I found were very, I thought were emotionally abusive. And I'm not going to include this I haven't included this in this edited recording, but later on, Stefan says, some of the most vicious people I've ever met are mystics. And some of the most vicious people I've ever met are mystics. There was one woman in particular, not someone I was in a relationship with, but it was a close platonic friend, who was very into like the Brahma Kumaris Center. And she used to we went to Glastonbury together. We went to White Horse Hill and things like that. And to cut a long story short, I became unhappy with the way she was treating me. I was unhappy. She'd be very nice to me when we were on our own together. When other people turned up, she started like talking down to me in various ways. And at one point, I challenged her on this behavior, and she went berserk. She just went completely nuclear. She called me every name she could think of. And I mean, because I trusted her, I told her things about myself, which meant she knew how to hit me where it hurts, and she went straight in there. This was not an escalation of our argument to the point where we were both saying horrible things to each other. This was her immediate response to my dissent. I mean, the worst thing I said to her was, I said, I don't like you bitching at me in front of other people. That's what I said to her. That's the strongest thing I said to her. And her response was to say things I won't repeat, but to attack me in a very, very personal way, to hurl abuse at me, and that's the last thing she ever said to me. Yeah, mystics can be downright evil. They're all, the love and light people, watch them, right? Because that love and light is very often a haze of treacle. to disguise more malevolent aspects of their personality. So, yeah, Stefan's right about that.
They are a brain rot. They are a noxious gas. They are the mustard gas to the flowers of your mind. Do not fuck with mysticism.
He's very poetic. I love it.
Friends, I'm telling you, it is a bad situation. I told you many years ago, when I was in theater school, I was good friends with a woman in theater school, and a friend of mine had given me a tape. Now, this friend of mine was a pretty disturbed guy. Of course, I'm looking back at it in hindsight. He was into some very, very strange bands. There was a band called King Kurt, if I remember rightly. He said that, I don't know if it's true, but he said that they used to throw animal entrails around in the concert. I remember we once went to go and see the Psychedelic Furs, and he was very proud because he showed me about a nail that he'd pushed all the way through the soft part of his thumb. He was a strange bird, man, in hindsight. And
do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
yes, I do.
Right, there are certain music fan scenes that attract disturbed people. It's true. The Psychedelic Furs, I quite like them. You know, pretty in pink, isn't she? You know, I was thinking more of these sort of Scandinavian death metal bands. Some of them are, yeah, the bands themselves are they're pretty horrible people, and very, very disturbed, damaged people, and they attract damaged people who listen to them.
Anyway, he gave me a tape that some band had put together called Sounds of Hell, or something like that. And it literally was a soundscape of what it sounded like in hell. And I remember just playing it with this girl one night. I just was like, hey, what's on this? And we started, and it like literally we had to, it turned it off. Like we both leaped at the cassette player at the time, turn that off. That way, madness lies. Do not screw with psychic stuff. Oh, I had a feeling, blah, blah, blah. Ooh, if you get a cold shiver, it's because a goose is walking over your grave. Oh, if there's a cold spot in a room, that's because there's a ghost there. Do not fuck with mysticism.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
What a ridiculous straw man that was. So you just say, oh, anyone says there's a cold spot in this room, that means there's a ghost there. Well, the most likely explanation is there's a draft. If you get a chill, it doesn't mean a goose is walking over your grave. I mean, where does he pick up these ridiculous caricatures and tries to paste these identities onto people like me? It's insulting. It's downright insulting.
It tears the fabric of your mind into a million tiny pieces, scatters them to the wind, and you lose your sanity. Do not screw with mysticism. So you got to tell her there's no such thing as ghosts. You're not haunted. There's no such thing as ghosts. If you're religious, your soul goes somewhere else. It doesn't stick around. But there's no such thing as ghosts. You can't be haunted.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Why not tell her that 2 + 2 = 5 as well? I mean, if you're going to say, if for example, ghosts exist and hauntings happen, and there's reason to believe they are, and you tell her they're not, you're like O'Brien saying, no, Winston, 2 + 2 = 5. I'm holding up 5 fingers. That itself is denying reality.
And of course, ghosts of evil people don't exist in Christianity in terms of haunting the living because they go to hell. They go to hell. So they're not here to haunt the living. So she has been infected by a brain virus called mysticism, where she believes she could be haunted by the pedophile who molested her as a child. She is not. She cannot be. He's fucking dead and gone.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
And good riddance to him. Yeah, he's gone from this world. Where he goes to after that, I don't know. I believe in karma. I believe that you, either in this life or the next, you have to face the consequences of everything you've done. But yeah, he is gone. I mean, but the thing about haunting, again, if hauntings actually happen, then and they're real, then what are you supposed to do? Pretend they're not real?
To believe that you're haunted is to believe that there is consciousness without matter. Again, I'm not talking about religion. There's consciousness without matter. You've given up cause and effect. And when you give up cause and effect, anything goes.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Well, that's not necessarily true, because consciousness, you see, is consciousness without matter. Well, consciousness has yet to be located within matter. And if it can't be located within matter, then where is it? You can pretend it doesn't exist like Daniel Dennett does. Or you can actually rise to the challenge and say, okay, maybe there's another explanation for this. Like people like Anthony Peake and David Chalmers do. If people perceive ghosts, and these other things that Stefan dismisses so arrogantly. Maybe there's a process we have yet to understand which causes these phenomena to appear. Maybe, I mean, if for example there is some element of the consciousness of this horrible child abuser still floating around this old lady, there's ways and means of protecting herself from that. You see what I mean? It's not. It doesn't mean that he's come back to haunt you and he's going to and it's like the poltergeist. It's like a horror movie. No. He's not Freddy Krueger. You can. There's ways and means of getting rid of these things in a non-invasive, gentle way, which means that harmful spirits cannot actually hurt you. You can avoid the influence of harmful spirits through very, very simple means and very, very non-invasive means. So I can't say for sure that this horrible paedophile is not still hanging around, but he can't hurt a lot. I'm not really concerned about the ghosts of paedophiles. I'm concerned about the living ones.
Up can be down, black can be white, effect can be cause, you can reverse anything you want, and imagination becomes a cancer.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. Stefan is now comparing interest in the unexplained with anti-logic. I mean, what a ridiculous marginalization that is. What an extreme polarization. I mean, that is worthy of the bloody JREF forum and these other horrible skeptic forums where people just behave like dickheads. I mean, honestly, Stefan can do better than that. I know he can do better than that.
Imagination is great. Love imagination. But imagination without discipline is destructive psychosis. Imagination without the discipline of reason and evidence, without being tightly constrained by the discipline of reason and evidence, imagination washes away your personality and replaces your judgment with a kind of fantastical quasi-psychosis wherein nothing is real and you can think and unthink things in and out of reality. You become a kind of god in the metaphysics of your own delusions. Oh, that guy from 70 years ago is haunting me. It's like, no, he's not. No, he's not. I mean, the mind, he's in your head. I get all of that, but he's not physically merging with your flesh or flowing through you like wind through the leaves of a tree. No, he's not doing that.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, what he says about imagination, about letting your imagination run away with you, is true. But he's applying it unfairly yet again to psychical research and things like that. He's applying it to literally everyone who doesn't share his views on the materialistic paradigm.
It's not like you hung a sponge in the river and the water is flowing through. No, he's not. No, you've got to be strict as shit because we are a mind that has evolved from rank fantasy to quasi-reality. We have evolved from rank fantasy to quasi-reality. The mysticism of our distant ancestors would dwarf the craziest person alive right now. So we grew out of imagination was bigger than the universe. Right? The gods and the demons and the devils and the ghosts, and there are dryads in trees, and there are spirits walking the land, and you must apologize to the rock for moving it away from its preferred place of resting, and the mysticism of our unfettered, psychotic, overarching, cancerous imagination eclipsed reality itself, and we lived in a world of fetid dreamscapes. And we had to tamp that shit down.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
This is again very unfair. What Stefan is, this is a very unoriginal, quite fashionable, and rather cliched attitude that emerged out of post-enlightenment, that humans rose from a state of superstitious barbarism, where belief in all the things that Stefan doesn't like equated with a lack of rationality and lack of ethics. So there was no science, there was no law. We just bashed each other over the head with clubs. And then by casting aside those superstitious beliefs, we ascended to a level where we could build space rockets and then have an industrial revolution and computers. I mean, this is so. Again, this is so one-sided. It's so one-dimensional. For example, he mentions apologizing to a rock if you move it. In Japan, they do that. Japanese people believe in something called kami, which means there's literally spirits in the landscape, and there's spirits in some unusual rocks. And in fact, for centuries, they've been carving rocks and things like that. So by Stefan's logic, Japan should be basically some kind of like savage reservation in Huxley's Brave New World. But are the Japanese backward? Are they unscientific? Anyone who's played Nintendo or ridden on the Shinkansen train will realize that that is actually a complete misrepresentation of the Japanese people simply because they have these beliefs. You know, he's really sounding very much like Richard Dawkins right now.
Oh, I was just thinking of you when you called. Isn't that funny? Oh, I had a feeling. I had a feeling he shouldn't go on that plane. I had a feeling he shouldn't take. Oh, I had a feeling. Cancerous, estrogen drowning, reality obscuring, spine of the mind breaking superstitions.
Do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
No, that's not untrue. Now, synchronicity, the presence of synchronicity, is a serious subject. It's being. I mean, remember the book Beyond Coincidence? It's on my shelf there. It's a serious subject, and again, it's something that skeptics won't deal with because they will not declare a statistical ceiling, as I've said before with the coincidence theory. But you know, this idea, oh, I was just thinking of you when you called. All right, that is not something that I think we should just dismiss. Sometimes it may be coincidence. It could be because you may think of people all the time, and then you see them, and you just remember you thought of them because you happen to see them. But I don't think that explains it 100% the entire phenomenon.
Stay the fuck away from mysticism. Be strict with it. Keep your imagination. It's a wonderful servant and a fucking crippling master.
Right. So that is the end of another analysis of Stefan Molyneux, another reply to Stefan Molyneux. I hope you got something out of it. And, you know, I think I do like Stefan. I like what he does, and I'm interested in listening to what he has to say. But this doesn't mean he's right about everything. And it's actually quite good to see these things so I can like address them. And the very fact that I find him I'm so inspired to criticize him in so much detail is probably a tribute to his value as a thinker. So I want to thank you all for watching. What's coming next? Well, I've got to do another reply to comments video at some point. I hope I get more comments than last time. Hint, hint, go ahead, speak your mind. Now you're not obliged to do that. No one is obliged to comment on my videos if you don't want to, but it's always nice when you do. So please, I hope you will. And I am taking another couple of trips. There's some more conferences coming up, and there will, of course, be reportages. So stay tuned for those in the next couple of weeks. Thank you for watching Hapanwo TV. Come on, where's my hand? Oh, here we go. Where's my hand? Oh, yeah, my hand is sort of up here like that. There we go. You can see it now. Hospital porters, pride and dignity, stop the New World Order.